Nobody in the village of Ashanti could explain how Kwame, the gym instructor everyone admired, maintained his perfect physique while never eating a single meal in public. But when a young weaver named Zara discovered his secret, she unleashed a love story so powerful it would tear down the walls between life and death and transform an entire kingdom forever. This is the story of the ghost who fell in love and changed everything. They say some secrets are meant to stay buried, but love has a way of digging up even the deepest graves. Kwame arrived in Ashanti on a morning thick with fog, the kind of mist that made the boundary between the living world and the spirit realm grow thin and permeable. He carried nothing but a worn leather bag and a smile that could make hearts skip beats, appearing at the village gates like a figure stepping out of legend itself. Within weeks, he had opened a training ground near the marketplace, teaching young warriors the ancient arts of strength and combat that had been passed down through generations. His body was carved from stone, each muscle defined with impossible perfection, his movements fluid as water flowing over rocks, his knowledge seemingly endless and drawn from sources no living person could have accessed. Men came to learn from him, eager to master the techniques that made him unbeatable in demonstrations. Women came to watch him, captivated by his grace and power and the mysterious sadness that lingered in his eyes even when he smiled. Children gathered around to hear his stories of distant lands and legendary battles, tales so vivid they seemed more like memories than mere storytelling. But nobody, not even the village elders who claimed to know everything worth knowing, could answer the simplest question: where did Kwame come from, and why did he never eat? Zara first noticed this peculiarity during the harvest festival, when the entire village gathered to feast and celebrate the abundance the gods had provided. She watched from her weaving hut, her hands moving automatically through the familiar patterns of thread and loom, while her attention remained fixed on the training ground where Kwame sat among the warriors. The feast was magnificent, with roasted meats and fresh fruits and palm wine flowing freely. Yet Kwame's plate remained untouched before him, the food growing cold and attracting flies while he laughed and talked as though nothing was amiss. When someone offered him meat, he smiled that devastating smile and said he had eaten earlier. When they brought him palm wine, claiming it was an insult to refuse, he claimed to be fasting for spiritual reasons, seeking clarity through denial of earthly pleasures. Zara, whose grandmother had been a powerful seer, capable of conversing with ancestors and spirits alike, felt something stir in her blood, that familiar tingle that meant the world was not as it appeared, that surfaces were hiding deeper truths. Her grandmother had taught her to see beyond the veil that separated the living from the dead, to recognize the shimmer of spirits among the living, to understand that some people walked between worlds, existing in multiple realities simultaneously. And as she watched Kwame move through the festival, never eating, never drinking, always present, but somehow separate from the joy and celebration around him, she began to suspect the impossible truth that would change everything. Days turned to weeks, and Zara's fascination grew into something deeper and more dangerous. She found excuses to walk past the training ground, pretending to gather herbs or visit friends who lived nearby, all so she could watch Kwame teach the young warriors. His voice was strong and sure, carrying across the compound with authority that came from true mastery rather than mere confidence. His demonstrations were breathtaking in their precision, movements so perfect they seemed choreographed by the gods themselves. But she noticed other things too, small details that others missed in their admiration. How he cast no shadow at noon when the sun was directly overhead, how dogs would bark at empty air when he passed, their hackles raised and their eyes tracking something invisible to human sight, how his footprints in the dust seemed lighter than they should be, barely making impressions and disappearing faster than natural erosion could account for. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, and the boundary between day and night made spirits more visible to those with the sight, Zara gathered her courage and approached him. The training ground was empty, the warriors having gone home to their families and their evening meals. Kwame sat beneath a baobab tree, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed almost too perfect, too measured, like someone remembering to breathe rather than breathing naturally because they needed air to survive. "I know what you are," Zara said softly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest and reveal itself to the world. Kwame's eyes opened slowly, and in them Zara saw depths of sorrow she couldn't begin to fathom. Centuries of loneliness and longing compressed into a single gaze that nearly brought her to her knees with its weight. "Do you?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, echoing with experiences that no living person should possess. "Then you know I shouldn't be here." You know I'm breaking every law that separates the living from the dead, violating boundaries that have existed since the world was young. You know that what I'm doing is impossible, forbidden by both human tradition and cosmic decree, and dangerous to everyone around me because love between worlds can tear reality apart. Zara sat down beside him, close enough to feel the strange coldness that emanated from his form, the absence of warmth that marked him as something other than alive, a being whose internal fire had been extinguished long ago. "Tell me your story," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with determination. "Tell me how a ghost becomes a gym instructor. Tell me why you're here, teaching warriors who don't know they're learning from someone who died long ago. Tell me everything, and let me decide what's dangerous and what's worth the risk." And so Kwame told her a tale that would break her heart and mend it again, a story of betrayal and redemption that spanned centuries. He had been a warrior prince 200 years earlier, before the great kingdoms fell to internal strife and external pressures. The greatest fighter his kingdom had ever known. His father, the king, had entrusted him with defending their people against invaders who came from across the great water. Men with weapons that spat fire and thunder and ships that could cross oceans. Kwame had trained his entire life for this purpose, mastering every fighting style known to his people, becoming a weapon forged from dedication and discipline. But during a crucial battle against invaders who threatened to destroy everything his people had built over generations, he had been betrayed by his own brother Kofi, who wanted the throne for himself and saw the chaos of war as the perfect opportunity to eliminate his competition. Kwame died not in glorious combat that would have earned him a place among the honored ancestors, but from poison slipped into his water by trusted hands, a coward-esque death that denied him the warrior-esque passage to the ancestors. Relman left his spirit trapped between worlds, unable to move forward or backward. Instead, he became trapped in the liminal space, a ghost condemned to wander, watching kingdom after kingdom rise and fall like waves on the shore, unable to move forward into the peace of the ancestors' realm, unable to go back to the life that had been stolen from him. For 2 centuries, he drifted, invisible and forgotten by the living world that moved on without him, watching wars and famines and celebrations and births and death, always present but never participating, always seeing but never being seen. Until one day he discovered something that changed everything. If he focused all his spiritual energy, if he drew power from the belief and admiration of the living, channeling their faith in him into something approximating corporeal form, he could become almost solid, almost real, almost alive again. And so he had become Kwame the gym instructor, teaching warriors not for glory or payment, but simply to feel alive again, to have purpose beyond endless wandering, to be seen and valued by the living world he could no longer truly be part of. But why risk it? Zara asked, tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't fully explain. Grief for a man who died before she was born, mixing with fear for what their connection might cost them both. Why not move on? Find peace in the ancestors' realm where you belong? Let go of this world that rejected you and betrayed you and stole your rightful place. Why cling to shadows when you could have substance in another realm? Kwame looked at her with eyes that had witnessed empires crumble and civilizations bloom and fade like flowers in a garden tended by time itself. Because love isn't something you can simply let go of, no matter how many centuries pass or how much pain it causes. Love for my people, who deserved a better protector than I could be. Love for the warrior's way, the discipline and honor and purpose it provided. Love for life itself, for the simple joy of existing in a world full of wonder and beauty and possibility. And now he paused, reaching out a hand that trembled with the effort of remaining solid enough to be seen. Love for you, Zara, though. I know it as the most impossible thing of all, the most dangerous desire a dead man could harbor, the most foolish hope that could bloom in a heart that stopped beating 200 years ago. Zara felt her world shift beneath her, felt the ground become uncertain as though the earth itself was acknowledging that something fundamental had changed in the universe. She had come seeking answers to mysteries that intrigued her, and found something far more dangerous, a connection that transcended death itself, a bond that violated every natural law, a love that should unexist, but blazed with an intensity that made her grandmother's tales of spirit marriages and ghostly lovers seem like pale shadows of the truth. "I can see you," she whispered, reaching out her own hand to hover just above his, feeling the coldness radiate from his form, but also sensing something else, something warm and alive buried deep within the spectral shell. Not everyone can they? That's why they don't notice the strangeness, the shadows that don't fall, right? The food you never eat, the way you seem slightly out of phase with reality. But I see you, Kwame, I see all of you, every ghostly particle and every memory and every hope you're not supposed to have anymore. And I think I'm falling in love with a ghost, which my grandmother would say is either the most dangerous thing I could do or the most necessary. depending on whether the spirits approve. What followed was a love affair conducted in whispers and shadows in the spaces between heartbeats where the living and the dead could meet without reality tearing itself apart. Zara would come to the training ground after dark, when the village slept, and the boundary between worlds grew thin as silk, allowing passage for those who knew how to navigate the threshold. Kwame would manifest more fully in her presence, solid enough to hold her hand, though never quite warm present enough to whisper words of love. Though his breath never fogged in the cool night air, visible enough to gaze upon, though he flickered like candlelight in a drafty room, they shared secrets that spanned lifetimes and dreams that crossed the boundary between life and death, hopes and fears that transcended the temporal concerns of the living or the eternal perspective of the dead, creating a world that existed only for them, a bubble of impossible love floating in the stream of time that carried everything else toward inevitable endings. But love between the living and the dead cannot remain hidden forever, no matter how careful the lovers or how deep the shadows they hide within. The other ghosts, those bitter spirits who had accepted their fate of endless wandering and resented Kwame's refusal to do the same, who viewed his manifestation in the living world as an insult to their own resignation, began to whisper to the spirit world about his transgression. They reported to the guardian of the threshold, that ancient entity who maintained the laws separating the realms with an iron will, forged over millennia, that Kwame was not only manifesting in the physical world but falling in love with a living woman, creating connections that threatened the very fabric of cosmic order. The guardian descended upon the training ground one night like a thunderstorm made flesh, its form towering and terrible, woven from shadows and starlight and ancient anger accumulated over eons of judging souls. You were given the gift of wandering between worlds as punishment for your unfinished business, it pronounced, its voice shaking the earth itself and making the baobab trees tremble in terror. You were allowed to exist in the in-between place, neither fully dead nor capable of returning to life, as penance for dying with hatred and desire for revenge in your heart. But this connection with a living woman, this mockery of natural law that keeps the realms separate and distinct, this cannot stand. You have broken the most sacred boundary that exists in all of creation, and now you must face the consequences of your arrogance. Kwame stood before the guardian, no longer the confident instructor admired by warriors, but a soul laid bare, vulnerable and afraid in the face of cosmic judgment. "I understand the laws," he said, his voice steady despite fear that would have destroyed a lesser spirit. "But I also understand that love is the only thing stronger than death, the only force that can bridge worlds that were never meant to connect. I died because of hate and betrayal, consumed by bitterness at my brother's treachery. I've wandered for 200 years because of unfinished business that I thought was about revenge or justice. But Zara has shown me that maybe my unfinished business wasn't about punishing my brother, or reclaiming my throne, or even finding peace. Maybe it was about learning to love again, learning to trust, despite betrayal, learning that some connections are worth breaking every rule for, even if the price is oblivion itself." Before the guardian could respond with the judgment that seemed inevitable, Zara stepped forward, her grandmother's gift blazing in her blood like a flame that refused to be extinguished, allowing her to see the full terrible glory of the spirit before her without flinching or looking away. "You speak of natural law as though it's unchangeable," she said, her voice steady despite fear that made her hands tremble and her heart race. "But what's natural about keeping souls trapped for centuries in endless wandering? What's natural about building walls between worlds that used to flow together freely like rivers meeting the sea? My grandmother told me stories of the old times, when ancestors danced with the living during festivals, when death was understood as a transformation rather than a separation, when love could bridge any gap because people understood that consciousness persists beyond physical death. You haven't been maintaining balance or protecting natural order. You've been maintaining fear, enforcing separation, punishing souls for daring to love across boundaries that you created and then declared sacred." Behind her, drawn by the massive spiritual commotion that rippled across multiple planes of existence, came Nana Akaswa, the priestess, her staff glowing with ancestral power, and behind her came dozens of other ghosts, souls who had been trapped like Kwame for various transgressions against the rigid laws of separation, all of them watching from the shadows, hoping that maybe, finally, someone would challenge the ancient laws that imprisoned them all in endless loneliness. The confrontation that followed would become legend, told and retold until the words themselves became sacred, until children grew up knowing this story as well as they knew their own names. The guardian, forced to confront truths it had been avoiding for millennia, forced to see its own actions reflected in the eyes of the souls it had judged, began to change. Its terrible form wavered and shifted like smoke and wind, revealing beneath the cosmic authority and ancient power a soul just as trapped as those it judged. A being who had forgotten its original purpose of guiding souls through transition and lost itself in the enforcement of rules that had calcified into cruelty over countless generations. "I don't remember when I stopped being a guide and became a jailer," it whispered, its voice becoming almost human, tinged with confusion and regret. "I do want to remember when I started fearing love instead of celebrating it as the fundamental force that binds all existence together. I do unremember when boundaries meant to help souls navigate between states of being became walls meant to imprison them in eternal separation." Nana Kaswa approached with the wisdom accumulated through decades of mediating between worlds, her ancient face kind despite the seriousness of the moment. "Then remember now," she said gently, her voice carrying the authority of one who speaks for ancestors and the living alike. "Remember that your purpose was never to separate but to guide, never to punish but to help souls find their way home, wherever home might be for each unique spirit. And sometimes home isn't the ancestors' realm or the living world, but the space between, where love creates its own reality that transcends the categories we use to organize existence." The guardian dissolved into light, pure and blinding and transformative. And in that moment of cosmic transformation, all the trapped souls were freed from centuries of imprisonment. Some ascended to the ancestors' realm, finally able to rest and eventually be reborn into new lives. Some chose to reincarnate immediately, eager to experience physical existence again with the wisdom they'd gained from their time between worlds. And some, like Kwame, were offered a choice they had never imagined possible: return to life with no memory of death or wandering, move on to the ancestors' realm to rest until rebirth, or remain as bridges between worlds, helping other souls find their way through the transition that all living beings must eventually make. Kwame looked at Zara, and she looked back with eyes full of love and tears and understanding that transcended mere words. "I choose you," he said, his voice ringing with certainty. "I choose to be a bridge between worlds, to help others navigate the confusion I experienced, to turn my centuries of pain into purpose that serves the living and the dead alike. But only if you'll walk this path with me, because I've learned that nothing worth doing should be done alone." Zara smiled through her tears, radiant with joy, despite the weight of the responsibility they were accepting. "My grandmother's gift already makes me a bridge between worlds, already marks me as someone who exists partially in multiple realities. We'll do this together, teaching warriors by day to honor your past, guiding souls by night to serve the future, proving that love is stronger than any law, any death, any separation that tries to keep hearts apart." And so the gym instructor's secret was revealed, but not as a scandal or a horror that would drive people away in fear. Instead, it became a source of hope, a testament to the power of love to transform even death itself. Kwame continued teaching warriors the arts of combat and discipline, but now he also helped dying warriors make their peace with the transition ahead, helped confused ghosts who didn't understand they died find their way to the light, helped the living understand that death was on the end of love but its transformation into something eternal and unchangeable. Zara wove patterns that told their story into cloth that became sacred, pieces carried to distant villages and foreign lands, spreading the message that boundaries between worlds are meant to be bridges rather than walls, that love persists beyond death, that separation is an illusion created by fear rather than a fundamental truth of existence. The village of Ashanti changed, transformed by their presence from an ordinary settlement into a place of pilgrimage where the living and dead could coexist peacefully. The training ground became sacred space, where warriors learned not just physical techniques but spiritual truths, where the boundary between worlds was thin enough that ancestors could watch their descendants with pride and offer guidance through dreams and signs. The gym instructor, who was secretly a ghost, became the village's greatest treasure rather than its darkest secret, proof that transformation is always possible and that love conquers even death itself. Years passed, measured in seasons and festivals and generations of children who grew up knowing that death was not the end. Some say Zara eventually joined Kwame fully in the spirit realm, her natural death peaceful and welcomed as the next stage of their shared journey, their love unbroken by the transition from life to death. Others claim they both found a way to reincarnate together to live as mortals and experience the simple joys that Kwame had been denied. For 2 centuries, growing old in the same lifetime and passing through death's door hand in hand, but most believe they remained as they were eternal bridges between worlds, their love a living testament to the truth that death has no dominion over the heart, that some connections transcend every boundary that reality tries to impose, and that the greatest secrets aren't meant to be hidden in darkness but shared with the world, transforming everyone who hears them into believers in love's eternal power. This is the story of a gym instructor whose secret changed everything, the ghost who fell in love and shattered the ancient laws of death itself, proving that in the end, love is the only law that truly matters. The only force powerful enough to rewrite reality's fundamental code, the only magic. That never dies, but only grows stronger with time and telling.